Have you ever noticed how one small thing someone does can stay in your head for hours, sometimes even days? Maybe it was a comment, a tone, a look, or something they did that felt disrespectful. The moment passes, but somehow it doesn't actually end. It follows you. You replay it. You analyze it. You build conversations around it in your head. And before you know it, you're not just reacting to what happened, you're stuck inside it. Today, I'm going to show you why that happens and how to stop it to the point where people simply don't get under your skin anymore. Most people think anger comes from what others do. Someone says something rude, cuts you off, ignores you, or acts in a way you don't like. And the assumption is that their behavior is the cause of your frustration. But that's only partially true. What they did might trigger the reaction, but it's not what keeps it alive. Here's what's actually happening. The moment something bothers you, your brain flags it as important. It tries to make sense of it, to protect you, to prepare you for next time. That sounds useful, but it has a side effect most people don't notice. Every time you replay that moment in your head, you're not just remembering it, you're re-experiencing it. The same emotion comes back, the same irritation. And because you keep replaying it, you keep reactivating that emotion again and again. So the event itself might have lasted 10 seconds, but in your mind, it lasts for hours. That's why some people can ruin your entire day without even being there anymore. Let me make this simple. Imagine someone throws a ball at you once. That's the original event. It hits you, maybe it hurts, but then it's over. Now imagine that instead of letting it go, you pick up that same ball and keep throwing it at yourself for the next few hours. That's what replaying the situation does. The other person threw it once. You're the one continuing the impact. This is the core idea you need to understand. You are not staying angry because of what happened. You are staying angry because you are mentally repeating what happened. Once you see this clearly, something shifts. Because now the question is no longer, why did they do that? The question becomes, why am I continuing this? And that's where control comes back. Most people never question this loop. They assume their reaction is automatic and justified. If something was unfair, then feeling angry for a long time feels reasonable. But there's a difference between a reaction and a pattern. The initial reaction is natural. Your brain is wired to detect threats, disrespect, and anything that could affect your status or safety. That's not something you need to eliminate. The problem is what happens after. Instead of letting the reaction pass, most people attach to it. They start building a narrative. They interpret intentions. They imagine what they should have said. They predict future scenarios. And every layer adds fuel. What started as a simple trigger becomes a full mental storyline. This is why two people can experience the exact same situation, and one shrugs it off in seconds while the other carries it all day. It's not about the event. It's about how much mental time they give it. You might think that replaying the situation helps you understand it better or prepares you for next time, but in reality, it rarely leads to useful conclusions. It just deepens the emotional response. Think of your attention as a spotlight. Whatever you point it at becomes stronger in your experience. If you keep pointing it at something that annoyed you, you're amplifying it. You're increasing its importance and its emotional weight. And your brain interprets that attention as a signal. It starts to think, this matters, so it brings it back again. That's how the loop sustains itself. You give it attention, it grows. It grows, so your brain brings it back, and the cycle continues. This is why simply telling yourself to calm down doesn't work. You're trying to suppress the emotion while still feeding the process that creates it. If you keep replaying something, you will keep feeling it. That's not a mindset issue. That's how your brain works. So the goal is not to force yourself to feel differently. The goal is to stop feeding the loop. And that starts with a simple shift in awareness. The moment you notice that you're replaying something someone did, Recognize it for what it is. Not analysis, not problem solving, just repetition. You're not figuring anything out at that point. You're pressing play again. That realization changes your position. Instead of being inside the reaction, you're now observing the process. And once you see it, you can interrupt it. Because if the emotion is being sustained by repetition, then removing the repetition removes the fuel. This doesn't mean the feeling disappears instantly, but it stops growing. It fades instead of escalating. Most people spend years trying to control their emotions directly without realizing that the real leverage point is their attention. What you repeatedly think about shapes what you feel, and what you stop repeating loses its grip. If you want to reach a point where people don't bother you, you don't need to change other people, and you don't need to become numb. You need to stop mentally reliving what they did. That's where the real control is. Once you understand that anger is sustained by repetition, the next step is understanding why your mind keeps returning to it. Your brain is trying to protect you. Psychologically, situations like disrespect, rejection, or unfairness are treated as threats. When something like that happens, your brain assumes it's important to remember so you don't get caught off guard again. That's why the thought comes back. It's your brain saying, "This matters." But your brain doesn't distinguish between useful reflection and useless repetition. If you keep returning to the same thought, it assumes it's important and brings it back again. This is where most people get stuck. They think they're processing the situation, but they're reinforcing it. Real processing is structured and limited. It leads to a conclusion. Repetition is circular and leads nowhere, but it feels active, so it's easy to mistake it for progress. If you want to stop being affected by people, you need to break that loop deliberately. The first step is separating what actually happened from the story you're telling about it. Something happened, that's the event. Then your mind adds meaning. It assumes intent, exaggerates importance, and builds a narrative. For example, someone ignores you. That's the event. Then your mind turns it into, "They don't respect me," or "This is a problem I need to fix." That's the story. The emotion isn't just coming from the event. It's coming from the story layered on top of it. So when you feel yourself getting pulled back into a situation, ask a direct question. What actually happened without interpretation? This forces your mind out of the narrative and back into something concrete. Most of the time, the event itself is smaller than the story you've built around it. The second step is to stop engaging with thoughts that don't lead anywhere. This is not about suppressing them. It's about recognizing their function. When a thought comes up, evaluate it quickly. Is this helping me solve something real, or am I replaying the same moment again? If it's repetition, there's nothing to gain from continuing it. At that point, redirect your attention, not forcefully, but deliberately. Attention works like a muscle. Wherever you place it consistently becomes easier to return to. If you keep returning to the same frustrating memory, that pathway strengthens. If you consistently shift away from it, that pathway weakens over time. This is why people who seem unbothered are not necessarily different in personality. They are different in what they choose to engage with mentally. They experience the same triggers, but they don't continue them. The third step is to shorten the gap between noticing and interrupting. At first, you'll realize you've been replaying something after 10 minutes, then after 5, then after 1. Eventually, you catch it almost immediately. That moment of recognition is where the leverage is, because once you catch it early, the emotion hasn't fully built up yet. It's much easier to let it pass. This is a skill. You improve it through repetition. Every time you catch yourself and disengage, you're training your brain that this loop is not worth continuing. Over time, it brings it up less. Another important piece is understanding that not everything needs a reaction. A lot of what bothers you is not significant enough to justify the mental energy you're giving it. Ask yourself a practical question. Will this matter in a week? If the answer is no, Continuing to think about it is a poor use of your attention. This isn't about ignoring everything. If something requires action, then act. Have the conversation, set the boundary, address the issue. But once you've either decided to act or decided it doesn't matter, there is no benefit in replaying it. You either handle it or you drop it. There is no third useful option. One more factor is how you interpret other people's behavior. Most of the time, people are not acting with the level of intent you assume. They are distracted, stressed, or unaware. When you take things personally by default, you increase the number of situations that trigger you. When you give people less meaning, you give yourself more stability. This doesn't mean you tolerate everything. It means you don't automatically assign significance where it might not exist. When you combine all of this, something changes. You still notice when something is off. You still have preferences. You still take action when needed, but you don't carry things with you unnecessarily. You don't turn one moment into an entire day, and that's the real goal. Not to eliminate emotion, but to eliminate the unnecessary extension of it. If you remember one thing, let it be this: other people can trigger you, but they cannot sustain your reaction without your participation. The moment you stop replaying what happened, you remove the fuel that keeps the emotion alive. And when there is no fuel, the reaction fades on its own.